Alex Terrace here. So I am just starting to kick off reviewing other types of health products other than wellness equipment. I have done some supplemental reviews in the past, but on this video I will also just be covering and making a playlist on all kinds of different things that we have in our select choices that we make in our lifestyle with the intention of being healthier essentially. So I'm just kicking it off with this kind of randomly because I started to get this advertised, this brand, Immieats, on my on YouTube, and I figured why not just take a look at the ads and marketing. Of course, sound very appealing, but let's just jump into it. So this Immieats is kind of like your quote-unquote healthier, and I put that in quotations, healthier replacement for ramen noodles, and it's really not, as we'll review when we look at the ingredients. So first thing is, of course, nowadays especially, you really have to review every single food that comes in a bottle, bag, or box. And that's kind of just a good thing to remember. Bottle, bag, or box, basically anything that's ever packaged, you're going to have to review it. And this doesn't really matter which option you choose from Immieats. They're pretty much going to have the same questionable ingredients in them. Before we dive into that, generally speaking, if you are shopping for foods, and let's just call it Asian delicacy or Asian cuisine foods in that section of a supermarket or store, you will a lot of times have to read those ingredients closely, as with anything, because you'll see a lot of the same hidden food modifiers to enhance the flavor. Alright, so let's see, creamy chicken ramen. Alright, let's scroll down. So you have to scroll down here, and here's the ingredients as you open it. So I'm just going to kind of just off the top of my head go through these, and we're not going to fully break down every single one, but it's kind of just to kind of give you a sobering perspective of how complicated shopping is these days. So pea protein, what some people don't know is if you do a quick Google, and I like the app Perplexity. If you look in my top right hand corner of my computer here, Perplexity AI, it's called Perplexity AI. You can get that extension tool, and I'm generally using this AI search tool is better for searching the internet for maybe more research backed information and facts that are connected to research. It's probably a better tool than just using your normal search on Google or something like that. So you want to get that tool just to have on hand for kind of situations like this. So for example, if we did some research on pea protein, you'd see actually that there's a couple different ways to extract pea protein, and one of the methods is not a very good one. And ideally what we are looking for is a centrifugal process that doesn't use any chemicals and extreme heats and things like that. So there's a more natural processing of pea protein, long story short, and a few companies do it, and you can buy good pea protein out there, but even some of the mainstream companies that you might see that have pea protein or pea protein isolate, and mainstream meaning are trendy or popular, or you see it in stores often and things like that, you really do have to do your due diligence and actually look into the company and ask and see how are they extracting the protein from the peas. And part of the reason for doing that is some people can have an MSG-like reaction to the glutamic acid, that specific amino acid in pea protein, because of the way that it's processed. And people may have varying symptoms. So you kind of have to really know your body when it comes to having more of an MSG type of reaction. But there can be a noticeable difference if you're really in tune between trying different pea proteins. So do a little due diligence on that if you are vegetarian or vegan or somebody that's trying to look for more vegetarian-based protein sources. Again, just get educated on the different ways to extract pea protein, and then you'll kind of see what I mean, that there is a better way. And again, sometimes you'll see pea protein isolate as well. Now they don't say isolate here, probably is most likely just they're buying from a large manufacturer that's probably making a lot of isolate and throwing it in here. And Unfortunately, you're not even actually done there because there are so many questionable ingredients in this particular product. They're new to the market and probably trying to make this as cheap as possible. You really would also have to just double check, the source of peas, like before they're processed, where they're growing them, and how they are growing them. Because it is absolutely possible that if, for example, there was glyphosate or some other type of contamination, that contamination could still make it into the final extraction of the protein ingredient, which could add another layer of toxicity to it. So you also have to see where it's sourced. And again, like in this case where they listed here, they're not saying organic pea protein. Now there's many loopholes, which again, you can look and just type in here, like, what are the loopholes or, weak areas of the labeling of organic that consumers are not aware of, that might be questionable. So there's a lot of different things that are classified as organic. But again, when you look into like all the ways that a company can kind of find loopholes in the regulations, it's a little shocking. And so it just takes a lot. So there are certain other standards within organic. There's literally different tiers of certifications. They kind of mean different things. So it's not just one thing where you see like, oh, it says organic, therefore, I'm done there. It depends. So there are different, again, criteria depending on what type of organic certification that a company is actually going after. Moving on, wheat gluten. Generally, most people, if you're eating enough quantity of it, will form a reaction to it. And the super simple answer, if you don't know, is because there's glue in gluten. So the glue aspect of this literally is the wheat protein that is sticky. And maybe you get even made like sticky paste and things like that when you were a kid. So that's because of that protein in there. And, sticky rice, even people don't know that there's gluten in rice, or oatmeal, when it dries, how it gets really hard and sticky. So the glue or the protein in there will adhere to the walls of different parts of the digestive tract. And that can be one of the reasons why it can cause some irritation and inflammation, as the body has to take extra measures to try to remove it. And ultimately the body can't digest and process that protein very well, which is really more the other major issue of why it can essentially cause then an inflammational reaction. So if there is a compound, any type of compound in the digestive tract that the body can't break down well, that's essentially, it's going to be handled like a toxicity or toxin or a pathogen. It's going to basically have to use the resources of the immune system to process and excrete it and get rid of it. Again, it would just be like you got exposed to any other poison in your environment. It's registering to the body as something that's, it cannot really process very well, so it has to get rid of it. So it's really not a good, this is a protein technically, but it's not one that's very usable by the body. And for most people will just over time cause some low grade or extreme inflammation. Some people have a more extreme sensitivity to it, like celiac disease, for example. So stay away from this stuff. Again, that's going to be a big mistake that a lot of vegans and vegetarians make, because they may find a lot of things they're eating has wheat gluten in it. One of the main reasons they actually have that in here is because it's going to hold the noodles together, so when you're cooking them, they don't dissolve into mush. So it's mainly in there so they can add all these other ingredients, and again, it just doesn't fall apart. These gums also, as you see here, they play a little bit of that role too, but more of their role is in thickening the noodle and giving it its texture. And then when you combine those gums with the wheat gluten, it creates the perfect noodle, essentially. And again, obviously this is present in any type of other wheat noodles out there. And you even find it in rice, as I said, so they even make pasta noodles made of rice, right? So that's what keeps it from falling apart. Now they have to add extra in here than normal, because again, it's a bunch of unusual ingredients, right? It's not just like semolina wheat pasta. You have a lot of additional things in here. And then with that P especially, so they're going to have to add extra wheat gluten. That's a little bit more processed as well to really hold it all together. Food starch modified. That's essentially going to be something that's genetically modified. Modified simply means genetically modified. They just obviously don't want to put that word in there because it doesn't look good and it takes up more space. Basically, there's many things that are modified these days. So that's basically what that means. So, some people definitely should stay away from starches in foods, and you actually will find starches in many foods you may not realize. So start looking at ingredients and labels. It tends to create a stronger glycemic spike and blood sugar spike response than just eating sugar or just a straight carb. There are actually a lot of carbs that have starches naturally in it. What I'm trying to describe here is that you see a lot of foods where they're adding additional processed starch to give it, as part of just the mix of ingredients to give it a certain texture. So when you add additional starches, that's especially where you start to have a more potential disturbance to your metabolism. Now when you modify it, that's definitely not good. So they could be modifying it in a variety of ways that the body is going to react to, because it's not normally, the body digestively is designed to process starches, like say a potato, which has a lot of starch in it. It's designed and evolved to, of course, be able to handle eating a potato, right? But there's many ways you could modify the starches in there where the body's just not going to handle it very well. And again, this can lead to digestive distress, inflammation, needing a lot of immune resources, immune cells of varying kinds to handle this. Okay. Sustainable palm oil, it's good. There's a lot of unsustainable palm oil, so that's good to see. Obviously, when you have a lot of questionable ingredients, you unfortunately have to question everything and actually see, once again, can they really back up that claim? Basically, long story short. And even furthermore, because there's so many holes in the organic labeling, there's probably some additional holes in what you could say is sustainable. You know what I'm saying? And I haven't actually looked into that, but I could guarantee you that there's probably many ways around that, but where you can still claim it as sustainable. The bigger question here, though, is just being aware of, you never want to be consuming a lot of seed oils. You have to be aware of the quantity, and there's a lot of research out there, and it's just one of those things you want to keep low in your diet for varying reasons, to not get into it. So, a little bit in a food, in one food here and there, it's not a big deal, but you definitely, before you know it, between all the different things in a bottle, bag, or box, a lot of times you can start to realize, like, oh my gosh, like I'm having on average 2 or 3 or 4 things per day with seed oils in it, 7 days a week. It can happen extremely easy these days because companies, it's just very common, basically in processed foods, which is what this is, to find seed oils in all kinds of things. So in a low quantity, not a big deal, randomly here and there if you happen to have it. But all these things add up. So I'd be, wary of that. Wheat flour, of course, any food that has wheat flour in it, of which there's many foods that have wheat flour in it. There's varying grades of wheat flour. There's 0, 00, 000. You can again just type that into that search extension. The differences between grades of wheat flour. And so, just like organic, same thing. So there's different types of wheat flour that are out there. And, if it just states wheat flour just like that, and on their label they don't say anything else about that wheat, you just have to assume that it's going to be very poor quality. And so, is there like glyphosate residues in there from that or one of the many other ingredients in here? I could almost guarantee it that there's going to be glyphosate residues in here in this product. It would be almost impossible that there wasn't. If you don't know anything about glyphosate, I'm going to actually just type it in here so you can actually see how to spell it. Glyphosate. There was a pretty big lawsuit with Monsanto, several really, but a really big one quite recently actually. So you can probably pull up some news reports about that. So check that out. This is a major, extremely bad toxin that screws up all kinds of things, starting from the gut, but ultimately then affects the rest of the body. And it can lead to all kinds of disease states over time. And you really have to, unfortunately nowadays, because there's contamination, cross-contamination, even into some organic farms and things like that, you actually, ideally, if you're going to get a processed food or something in a bottle, bag, or box, you have to double check with the company and see if they've done glyphosate testing. Long story short. So, like in the granola section, for example, because you can find glyphosate, and usually you find it most commonly, by the way, in a grain, any product with grains in it. So if you went to like the granola section of a supermarket, you may only see one brand or no brands that say glyphosate free, glyphosate testing free of that. Or they have a type of certification that covers a variety of toxins, pesticides, and things like that, including glyphosate. So there is, in some of the nicer stores, you will find on average one granola brand or two in like super mainstream supermarkets. So there's different tiers, right, of supermarkets: Sprouts Market and Whole Foods and Fresh Market, and just ones that are a little upper tier with some more quality offerings. You'll always find at least one or two clean granolas, and I'm just using this as an example. But if you go to kind of just your average local supermarket, it's not common to find any granolas that aren't contaminated. And again, this stuff adds up big time. Glyphosate can hang in your body for a while. So some of these things, like, they really, if you get exposed to it just even a few times, it can have some semi-permanent lasting effects unless you do a protocol to actually kind of detox and heal the damages. So just be very extremely wary of wheat flour because it's contaminated. And then also any grains in a product, whether it's wheat or rice or whatever, any type of grain, when they mass process it, if it's being mass farmed, they store those grains in a silo, and it's extremely common for those grains to be contaminated over time because of how they're storing them with mycotoxins and aflatoxins. So you can also look that up, mycotoxins, aflatoxins. Usually it's more mycotoxins when it comes to grains. So again, that's just another thing that you'll find that you have to watch out for with grains. So a lot of people have a lot of different health issues that make them particularly vulnerable or sensitive to these types of inorganic and organic compounds in foods. And very much also might just be literally all their health conditions can be related to long-term exposure to them that compromise their digestive system, compromise their immune system, and then what do you think happens? Everything starts to go downhill at that point. And this it could take, decades, okay? So it's cumulative, long-term cumulative damage, and then of course there's a lot of other environmental stressors that are wearing people down. So watch out for those as well, so, in terms of how they're stored, grains. Sunflower seed protein. Again, anytime you see proteins that are being extracted from things we all know about, right? Like we wouldn't think like, oh, there's protein in sunflower seeds. Well, yeah, of course. How are they extracting that protein? And obviously, once again, there's good ways to extract it and not so good ways. So you're gonna have to look that up. There's nothing wrong per se with gums, these common gums that you see, and there's other gums out there too. Nothing wrong with that per se. They can sometimes be a very good prebiotic fiber. However, it again has to do with how they're being processed. So there's ways to process those gums where it's a very, very good prebiotic fiber. And prebiotics meaning they're feeding the good bacteria in your gut. And depending on the type of fiber it is, it'll feed different bacterial strains in different stages of your gut. So some might feed bacteria in the small intestine, some might feed in the large intestine, some might feed it in the colon, and so on and so forth. So taking a good probiotic is definitely helpful. Keep in mind, 98% of probiotics are not good, but if you take a good one, you can make that a lot better, the biome, by also taking it with the right prebiotics. So there is good processed gums out there, and then there's not so good. And once again, leads to triggering a lot of inflammational pathways, and again, trying to call out to the immune system to assist, which again taxes the immune system. Now, some people, if they have a really compromised biome, sometimes if it's really compromised between the gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, they have to avoid any foods with gums in it, and sometimes even restrict their diet in a lot of other ways. So just throwing it out there that gets a little complex depending on what's going on in the biome. Sometimes it's like life-changing, literally, to be adding in certain prebiotic fibers for people. And then sometimes it can contribute actually to more of a problem, especially if they're extremely overrun with gram-negative bacteria. Okay, so sometimes you have to be much more restrictive, heal the gut in other protocols, and then eventually adding in some of these prebiotics is kind of an essential part of getting the biome back fully. So there is an order to things, and that order can depend person to person. So I would just throw out there, by the way, another common, it's not a gum, but it's a similar type of fiber, is carrageenan. Carrageenan, and they might even be calling seaweed powder carrageenan, but my guess is this is more for flavoring, actually. Give it a little bit of that fishy, seaweedy taste. But many times carrageenan is another thing that has both good processing of it and not good processing of it. And again, those who are extremely sensitive to varying things sometimes have to avoid it completely, and they could have extreme reactions to these types of things. So moving on. Salt, that's going to be, if you ever see an ingredient that just says salt, and if they already have other questionable ingredients, you just have to assume then that's just regular table salt that's mined cheaply and processed cheaply. So long story short is regular table salt, okay, the way it's processed through extreme heats and stuff like that, that's mined, okay, that, to keep it simple, the body does not handle that very well. It actually, there is a rating system in chemistry that will rate compounds based on how toxic it is to the body. So to make it simple, like everybody's heard of cyanide, as a deadly poison. So if you had, 1 milligram of cyanide, it would have a certain rating system associated with that. And if you had 1 milligram of salt, that same rating system rates that, particular chemical or compound. And, in this example, of course, cyanide is going to be of a higher rating, considered more toxic at 1 milligram versus salt, right? Obviously. But my point being is that salt, highly processed in this form, does actually register on that system as a toxin. And, everything within moderation, of course. Does your body have to handle toxins every single day? Of course. Things from your environment that you're consuming or exposed to, and then also endotoxins, like toxins that our body might be creating, or parasites or whatever, on a daily basis, right? And of course, normally our immune system should be able to keep up with all that, right, and all of our organs. But this can be one of these things where people think salt is just salt, like all salt is the same. But you can also get a super clean, properly processed sea salt, of which there's only very few in the world that are sold. And if you have something like that, it can do the complete opposite. It can be extremely supportive to the sensitive electrolyte balance in the body, which affects the blood, thus affecting everything else, which is kind of part of the bioterrain, okay, which is basically the fluid in and around cells. So real salt that the body actually has, so in other words, like if you went in and got some fluid, okay, out of your body, and you looked at it and you analyzed it, and you said, okay, like what is the form of that salt or saline in my body? What does that look like? What's in there? That's what I'm talking about. So if you're going to consume something, just in general, you want it to be extremely compatible, like a needed ingredient for your body to use in like blood plasma, as an example. Okay? But in the case of like this form of salt here, the body doesn't say, oh boy, this is great. I'm going to use this to help bolster and create better blood plasma. It does not register that way at all. It says, oh my God, this is not good. I need to get rid of this. Okay? So this form of salt is something that I need to get rid of. I need to use energy resources to get rid of it, immune system resources, and ultimately there's going to be a trade-off to get rid of it. Okay, so you don't want to be consuming things constantly where there's a trade-off, where it's a net negative zero, right, and a loss of energy and resources. Okay, so this will take from you. This food will take from you. It won't give you. It will age you. Okay, it will degenerate you. It'll do the opposite. This is always a can of worms, which a lot of people don't know, contains less than 2% of the following. Now here's an interesting thing you may not know is, while it's nice of them, okay, to actually say what the ingredients are here, that's less than 2%, legally, by FDA regulation and other regulations that have to do with food safety and things like that, manufacturing, technically, by law or regulation, the company, if there is anything under 2% in any food product, a company does not have to disclose that. So, what does that mean? That means that even though they disclose these ingredients here, there could be, 1,000 more ingredients. Of course, that's not realistic, but there could be several more ingredients here that are not disclosed. Pretty crazy, right? So, yeah. Just when you thought shopping and looking at ingredients, like you thought that, oh, I'll just get educated enough and I'm going to be able to navigate my way through this. Not always. So what I'm saying is sometimes it's impossible. Okay? Could you, spend $50,000 on a lawyer and finally, get a company to comply and show you things? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It's a ridiculous scenario. So basically, rule of thumb is, if you see a lot of other questionable ingredients, you kind of dig a little bit into the company and, you're like, I don't know about this company. It's kind of, it's obviously not the great product. You should just assume that it's likely that there's going to maybe be some other ingredients here they're not disclosing, right? Like, in other words, this company obviously is not trying to go above and beyond to be like the most healthy food ever, right? The most healthy ramen ever, That's obviously not the goal. So if that's the case, you just ignore it. You drop this product. You never buy it just based off of this and seeing this. But yeah, that's a crazy rule, crazy law, and that less than 2% applies everywhere. Okay, so if you think, oh, I'm buying the Whole Foods brand, I bought it from this amazing health store, the rule still applies. It's any food company, anyone. And is it supplements too? I can't remember. May want to look that up, but probably, because FDA doesn't really regulate supplements so much. But basically, yeah. So even if you get like a Whole Foods brand as an example, there could still be ingredients that are known to be problematic, okay, in health studies that are in that product, because it's less than 2%. So natural flavor, anytime you ever see that, never consume the product. That could be anything. It could be anything. Is there, yeah. It's so just basically avoid it. So there's all kinds of nasty chemicals out there, and yeah, so it could be basically a couple thousand different chemicals that could be in that. Yeast extract. Most people don't know this, but that the word yeast used in varying ways. This basically means it's another form of MSG. So most people know what MSG is, but if you just, again, use that great extension tool or do a Google search, you can look up all the studies, bad studies over the decades, showing all the side effects to what MSG does. which actually has even effect on the brain itself. So what that is that's another form of MSG. Okay, and why they put yeast extract in things is because MSG got a bad rap, as it should be, in the past. For a while there, right? Everybody knows about it for that reason. And then basically some companies wised up and they thought, well, we'll just put in this ingredient because it doesn't say MSG or monosodium glutamate. People won't wonder and they won't buy our product, because it says MSG on it, right? So they just went with this alternative here. So anytime you see spices, onion powder, any type of spice, most spices are irradiated depending on where they're going, number one. And again, the more concerning thing is there's nothing inherently wrong with onions. Now, digestively, some people should avoid them, okay, or just eat them in moderation. But again, there's nothing inherently wrong with an onion powder. However, what do you think the quality of the onions are in terms of where they're growing? So anything, especially in the ground, we all know one of the biggest exposure of toxins is pesticides and things sprayed or in the soils of plants. Okay, that's one of the biggest daily exposures for most people, okay, unless they live in a major city and they have a lot of air pollution. So onions are obviously grow underground, right? So any of these kind of like root vegetables, if that is in a really toxic, when a place has toxic farming methods or just the standard, mass agriculture practices, that ground, think about how many cycles and seasons of growing and raining and watering. Do you know how toxic that ground is? So that's where the onions are growing, okay? Or that's where the garlic is growing, okay? Or that's where the turmeric is growing, okay? So these things can be loaded with nasties, okay? Even way more than things that grow above ground, like tomatoes, okay? Okay, so now, is this likely, these seasonings coming from China? Absolutely, very likely, okay, especially because this is like an Asian sort of marketing angle, and I bet you somewhere, I haven't looked yet, but I bet you they're manufacturing over in China. So, and I'm saying I don't really have a problem with China in general. I'm just saying that with their food standards and what they do agriculturally, they don't really have even some of the regulations we have over here in the United States or Canada or some of these other countries. So they just do, basically they do whatever they want to do. And for the most part, there's a lot of companies out there manufacturing in agriculture, and they only care about the dollar. They only care about the bottom line, the profit. So they do crazy, crazy things. So what could be in that onion powder, garlic powder? If it's from China, grown there, God only knows is the answer. You really, truly don't even want to know what could potentially be in there. So in other words, it's best to just completely avoid this. So you definitely have to watch out for spices, seasonings, and also, where they're getting, where they're actually getting these things from, especially if they're in the ground, okay? Soy sauce, powder, just in general, things that come from soy for flavoring related purposes. Again, a lot of times there's varying forms of MSG in it, and most likely, based off how I'm critiquing this, most likely there's probably still another form of MSG in here. Wouldn't be surprised. Again, remember, they don't have to disclose everything. There's a lot of loopholes around ingredients. So even something that seems harmless, like a tomato powder, there could be ways of processing this that enhance the flavor of it. Okay, do you get what I'm saying? That could be quite bad for you. But legally, how they can disclose that is just simply calling it tomato powder. Seaweed powder, same thing. The other problem is if it is actual real seaweed, most seaweed is contaminated because seaweed is one of these things that does many things for the ocean. But one is it helps clean up and bind to certain types of toxins, heavy metals, things like that in the water, which is good for the ocean. But nowadays, because there's a lot of areas of the ocean, waters that are contaminated, seaweeds will over time easily bind and carry a lot of those toxins. So there's very few seaweeds from companies that are actually clean, and they do all the proper testing and things like that, batch to batch. It's there's very few companies, so most of it is contaminated. So you just generally want to avoid seaweeds. Can you have seaweeds like randomly, here and there? Yeah, who cares? But if you're gonna if you think it's good for you and you're gonna be having seaweed more often, you better really watch it and do some due diligence. Shiitake mushroom powder. Most mushrooms, especially the way they mass manufacture like this, are contaminated with mycotoxins. Most of the medicinal mushrooms that you see from supplement companies that are so trendy now, a majority of those are contaminated with mycotoxins. It's probably 85%, 90%, because it's more expensive is the answer. It's quite complicated actually, mushrooms in particular, to grow them in a very clean manner. It's very expensive. So for the most part, they're mostly usually contaminated. Medicinal mushrooms can be incredible for you if you are interested in looking for or knowing about what are like clean medicinal mushroom supplements. I am aware of a few brands. Same thing. Things that are growing right in soils, right? You got to look into that, right? Chicory root inulin powder depending on the digestive process of somebody. This is another prebiotic, which is incredible for you. But again, it depends on how it's processed, and it depends on the state of your biome, where you're at currently. So it might be something to avoid, but generally, once people get healthier, biome-wise, you want to include prebiotics, as part of your daily or weekly thing to bolster your gut. Turmeric, a good majority of it is, because of the nature of the plant, it does tend to bind like lead and other heavy metals. So there's a lot of people that are consuming a lot of turmeric and getting exposed to heavy metals. Citric acid, that's complicated, but it depends on how it's processed, but also there are certain people that might have certain pathogenic issues happening, and this might be something they need to avoid, depending. Okay. Spices, here's another red flag. What do you think I'm going to say? So spices is just a generic term that allows a company, just like natural flavor here. Okay, natural flavor and spices basically just means that they can put, that could be anything. Yeah, it could just be anything that is classified as a flavor enhancer, and or just an ingredient that they don't want to disclose because people might have an issue with it, and it might even get them in trouble, but they legally don't have to disclose it, basically. So this is just a catch-all. Okay, now, way long ago in the past, you might have a company that has a proprietary ingredient that really gives something a unique flavor that might not be bad for you, and they're just doing it to, just to be competitive, and so nobody copies their recipe, so to say. Once upon a time, some of these things start for harmless reasons, right? Just so, like, if you started a company, you wouldn't have a bunch of people trying to knock it off and use your secret recipe, right? But 99% of the time, there's all kinds of crap in here. It's scary. There could be, it's just, you don't even want to know, once again, what could be in there. Medium chain triglycerides, that's basically from coconut. Usually when you see that, it's not usually a problem, and these can produce ketones in the body that are good for you. So I'm not too concerned about that. Sugar, that can, depending on, most of it's highly processed from beets. Usually that's where most sugar comes from, and there is better sugar out there, long story short. Cane sugar is really good, but depending on how they're, usually if you see it like this in a cheap product, they're usually bleaching, okay, the sugar that they're extracting from beets. Beets are obviously red, right? Very strong red color. So they need to actually bleach, okay, the sugar content. Beets have a lot of high amount of sugar in it. So that can be the issue, is how they're processing that sugar from the beets that makes it, again, there's nothing inherently wrong with sugar if you have a properly functioning metabolism. Okay. Obviously, things are in moderation, right? You don't want to have 400 grams of pure sugar every day, but nothing wrong with sugar, but depending on again where they're getting it and how it's processed can be an issue. Potassium chloride as a preservative, that's just a form of sodium chloride is salt, right? So kind of a salt-like compound. Nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong with that at all. Calcium carbonate, there's probably a tiny amount in here, so don't really have an issue with that. It's just a form of calcium. Now, some people do take a supplement form of calcium carbonate, like large amounts every single day, and in general, most people should not even be supplementing with calcium, but that's a longer story. They should be supplementing with magnesium. Maltodextrin, that is a genetically modified dextrin. That's actually a form of sugar. Okay. Maltase. So this is a modified ingredient, a genetically modified ingredient. Whenever you see that means GMO, or well, it doesn't mean GMO, but you just know that that's a genetically modified. Same thing with here. Now they actually write modified here. Okay. So it's complicated, right? But there are several ingredients in here that are modified, and some of the ways they modify them may also be on a genetic level. I'm just making it simple for you to say, in the case of where you see the ingredient maltodextrin, that is definitely they modify that genetically. Okay. Oh my God, how long was that? So this is basically like how ridiculous the scenario is. It took me 41 minutes to go through the ingredients on one product. And this is just one product. So if I was reviewing other products, I might even have more to say. So that's it. If you ever, have questions about a particular product that you're taking, you can always put that in the comments below, or you can shoot me an email. Or if you have like any video ideas of me to review a product for a video, please email me or leave a comment below. And I would love to maybe consider doing that. And that's usually the fastest way, is just emailing me. Thanks for watching.